Many years ago, there was a point in my ministry where things were just incredibly busy and it seemed like everything was falling on me at once. At the time, I had already been busy leading several classes, and then one of our Sunday school teachers bailed at the last minute, and I happened to be the only one available to take that place. At the same time, I had been going through a sports injury with my running and was just recovering from that too. With everything going on in my ministry and in my personal life, I wasn't taking the time that I needed to be with God. I wasn't doing those things to be present with God, such as taking my monthly spiritual retreat. And as a result, I didn't feel God there in my life the way I had before. Now, around this time, our diocese was getting ready to put on a spiritual workshop one weekend, and they asked if I would be willing to help out. The role they had for me was small, and it was something that interested me. It was something that I thought I would enjoy doing. And at this time, too, our confirmation classes, as well as our baptismal preparation classes, had just ended. So I thought, why not take one more thing on? Well, I'm glad that I did, and it turned out that it was the best thing for me. One of the priests who was helping lead this workshop was unable to stay for the Eucharist that was planned at the end. And so I was asked if I might be willing to help celebrate that Eucharist. And I was glad that I said yes to that too. Because what happened is that in that moment when we were doing that Eucharist, in that moment when we were all together, and I was leading this celebration, for the first time in a long time, I felt God present. The first time in a long time, I felt that God was there. When we fall into hard times, it can be difficult for us to realize that God is there. It might even seem that God is absent. But that's not usually the case. Usually what it is that we are not taking the time to feel God's presence with us. A great story for dealing with these hardships, for seeing God in the midst of our sufferings, comes from the book of Job. One could say that it is the book on dealing with hardships. And in the book of Job, we see Job. He's introduced to us as a good and pious man. And then soon after the start, everything that could go wrong in his life does go wrong. And it's in the midst of all of this that the book of Job wrestles with trying to figure out, well, rather, it's Job's friends who are wrestling with trying to figure out what it is exactly that Job did wrong to lead to all these different things that have happened to him. Job, on the other hand, just wants a face-to-face with the Lord. And that brings us to our reading today. Because our reading in Job gets us right to the beginning of God coming down. and giving a talk to Job. And we only get the beginning of that talk. But as it goes on and on, we see God using the same phrases that Job was using with his friends. What that is God showing Job that he's been present there the whole time. It's God showing Job that he has been listening to everything that Job has been saying. And at the end of God's speech, Job says something to him. And it's best translated as comforted. Now, Job realizes his place in the grand scheme of things. But he's comforted. Comforted by the fact that God was listening the whole time. Comforted by the fact that God has been there, even though he didn't always realize it. And we get another similar story today in the gospel. There, Jesus and his disciples get on their boats, and they're out there in the sea. And all of a sudden, the winds pick up, and there's a whirlwind around them. The disciples are afraid for their lives. That's how bad this storm is. But the thing is Jesus is there with them the whole time. God is present. Yes, he's asleep at the stern, but he is there. He is present. It's this reason, this idea of presence, that God with Job and Jesus with his disciples, at the end of this time, at the end of this suffering, that they chastise them. Jesus even says, do you still have no faith? Do you still not trust in God? Do you still not see that God is present there with you? Now, all of us have hard times in our lives. All of us face hardships. In this broken world, with us broken people, there's no other way that it could go about. But when we face those hard times, we also must face whether we are going to be open to God's presence in our lives, even when it might seem that God is asleep at the stern of the ship. Are we willing to take the time to be with God? Are we willing to do those things that make it more obvious to us that God is present, that God is there with us? From my own experience, I can say that yes, there are times when it seems that God is not there in our hardships. But God is present all the same. God is there whether we realize it or not. And those hardships, as we see with Job, as we see with the disciples, they do come to an end. They do end eventually. And I find for myself, when that end does come, that I often think, how silly was I to worry, to fret so much? Why couldn't I have had a little more trust in God? And my hope for you, my hope for every one of you, whether you're here with us, present in this church, or whether you're with us online, my hope is that you'll take that time, you'll put in that work to make sure that God feels present with you. So that when you face those hard times, And even when it does seem like God is asleep at the stern of the ship, you won't worry. But instead, you will have faith because God is with you. God is with you in the depths of the storm. And God will be there with you to help you as you weather those dark times in your lives.